All right, well, thank you so much, Jerica. It's a pleasure to have to be able to speak to you and MPI today. My name is Kirk Hendrickson. I am the Chief Operating Officer here at Wordly.
And I'm Lisa Busby. I'm the principal of LB Plus Events. I'm located here in the Bay Area in Redwood City, California.
And it is our pleasure today to be speaking with you about AI interpretation, breaking the language barriers in your meetings. So today we're going to be covering a variety of different topics. We're going to start with interpretation challenges and opportunities. Then we're going to move on to an interview where I'm going to interview Lisa about her experience with using interpretation for events, and then show you a couple of case studies. And then we're going to end with a how-to guide for how to guide your clients through translation decisions. Now, with all that said, what we want to do immediately is get everybody using Wordly. Now, obviously, Jerica mentioned that Wordly is available today. And as you can see on the screen, Wordly is up and running. So what we're going to do is I'm going to ask everybody to try to participate if you can. You should see in the upper left of your screen, it says on custom live streaming service. And what you're going to be able to do is you're going to be able to access Wordly through this link. So if you start, you can see where that icon is. It says live and on custom live streaming service. Then you're going to click on the down arrow. Once you have clicked on the down arrow, it's going to give you an option. The option is to view stream on custom live streaming service. Then you're going to go ahead and click on that. Now it's going to open up a new web browser. So you're going to see it opening in a web browser window. In this web browser window, you can click on the language shown, and this will allow you to change which language you're using. So for example, you can change, if I wanted to, we could say change to French, and then now have the translation coming through in real time in French. So with just a simple click of the button, you can go back and forth between the different languages. So here's, you can click on the English, then you can see the chooser, and then you can choose the appropriate language and hit save, and then watch in the language of your choice. Now, we do suggest that you resize the window so it will fit alongside the Wordly presentation. Maybe you just have it overlay over where I'm showing the English captioning with Wordly. But as a result, we are able to go ahead and use the Wordly system. Just as a note, it works in Chrome, Safari, Firefox, or Edge. So hopefully you're not trying to use it on Internet Explorer. With that, no further ado, I'd like to begin by starting off with a quick poll. So Jerica, I would like you to go ahead and introduce poll number 1. And so what we're looking for here is that while we'll be discussing AI interpretation in more detail throughout this presentation, we'd like to get a sense of your initial expectations of which benefits of AI interpretation you anticipate being most valuable to your clients. Is it A, compliance with accessibility mandates, B, expanding audience size, C, improved engagement attendee value, D, novelty premium experience? Now here's how we like to use these polls interactively. Whatever benefit the majority of you believe is most valuable to your clients, we'll focus attention on that for the remainder of the presentation. This will allow you to guide where we go from here. So why don't we give it about 5 more seconds? And then Jerica, can you share the results of the poll?
Of course, I'll go ahead and end the polling. So get, 3 more seconds to cast your vote, and then I'll share that with you guys.
All right, fantastic. So it looks like we have 66% are indicating that improved engagement and attendee value is the most valuable benefit that you're expecting from AI interpretation, while there's also 28% at compliance with accessibility mandates, and then 6% at expanding audience size. So we'll definitely be focusing quite a bit of the discussion on how do we improve engagement and attendee value as we move forward. Now we're going to ask a second poll. And so for this second poll, what I would like is if everybody could go ahead and please answer, how often do your clients use interpretation today? A, always, B, half the time, C, occasionally, or D, never, don't know. Are you curious how much your peers deal with this question? Do you think you design events with interpretation more or less than your peers? You're about to find out. Okay, how about we'll give it about 5 more seconds, and then Jerica, if you could please share with us the results. Okay, perfect. So that's not surprising. Occasionally is definitely what we typically find with most of our clients that are coming to us, that they've occasionally, or in many cases, they have never used Wordly. So we see occasionally at 45% and never, interpretation, and never at 32%. 16% at always using interpretation is fantastic to see. And then half the time at 6%. What we're going to experience as you go forward is that with how the world is changing and how what we're describing with AI interpretation is that in many cases, we definitely expect that you're going to be moving that up to more often. Obviously those with always, it's hard to go up from there, but for those of you who are seeing it never or occasionally, you will likely be experiencing opportunities very soon in the future where it just makes sense to be adding translation and interpretation into your events. So let's go into why that would be. What I want you to do is start by imagining yourself, if you are attending an event that is being held entirely in another language. You are an individual who does not speak the language of the event, but you are still expected to be there. This is the experience that many of English language speaking event planners have never had. You've never had to go to an event where you were not where the event wasn't catering to your language. You've never had to go to a situation where you had to be the one wearing the headsets, or you had to be the one dealing with that there was a limited track of information. And so what I really want you to do is start to use what we have here as an opportunity to empathize with your attendees. And that's largely about what we're going to be considering as we move forward. We want you to put yourself in their shoes and empathize with the difficulties of what it's like to sit through 8 hours a day of content where the speakers are speaking in a language that you don't actually really understand. Maybe you know it a little bit, maybe it's your second language, but it's not your primary language. I want you to think about putting yourself in the shoes of what it's like if you only have a certain number of tracks that you're allowed to attend. And while they're topics that seem fascinating, you know, because of your language proficiency, you really won't understand what they say, and they're not offering interpretation for those tracks. And then I want you to think about what it's like to, if it's an in-person meeting, what it was like to have to go and get the headset, put the headset on, be the person wearing the giant headset in the middle of the room, or in the case of, virtual conferences, being relegated to a secondary audio track for the interpretation. We think it's really important that you start to empathize with these attendees because we have this very privileged position when we're English language speaking event organizers that so many events, you travel to Barcelona, Spain, the event's in English. You travel to Germany, the event's in English. What a privilege that is for us to have, but it also means that we don't necessarily empathize in the way we would like to. So with that point of view, what we would like to do now is go into exploring the challenges and opportunities of interpretation. So first, let's talk about the current model for interpretation and the obstacles that we have for adding interpretation to our event. So currently, interpretation is an entirely human, the existing solutions are entirely human-based. What this means is that they are very fragmented and not very scalable. It's hard to source for 12 different languages in 20 concurrent sessions in your event. In addition, there's high overhead associated with it. When it was in person, it was building out the booths that were required. When it's virtual, now it's using the virtual event platforms that have to coordinate and organize all of these different individuals and making sure that if you do have multiple sessions, that you have all of the different, the appropriate interpreters at the appropriate location at the right time. And then top it all off, it generally is very expensive to be able to use simultaneous interpretation. Each individual is a professional, and the fees are totally reasonable for what they do, but unfortunately they're often not reasonable for the budgets we have. And that's the challenge that we often face. So, but You might ask, well, yes, it's expensive, it's difficult, but why do we even need interpretation? There's some interesting statistics that I thought I would share with you related to that. The first statistic is that 67.8 million Americans do not speak English at home. That means that 67.8 million Americans, English is often really the second language for them. In addition, 8.6% of the US population is considered to be of limited English proficiency. So if you're English only event, that means you're excluding 8.6% of the population just right there. In addition, not only do we have interpretation needs, but related to interpretation is often accessibility, particularly for the hearing impaired. And when you consider that 5% of the world's population has disabling hearing loss, even if they could understand the spoken language, if you're not making it available to them in some sort of text format, then it's hard for them to be able to consume the content. And finally, we want to consider the fact that only 1/7 of the global population is actually proficient in English. And that means 6/7 is not. And so that means that with our global events, we're not necessarily reaching out to that 6/7 of the world population that really would be preferring to interact with us in a different language. So there are tremendous opportunities that we have if we are using interpretation. And so what I'm going to do is walk through some of those opportunities. By adding interpretation to your event, you can grow your audience by opening your event to all attendees, regardless of language. You can enter new markets by allowing your speakers to communicate more widely and communicate in local languages. You can enable greater attendee engagement by delivering content into their preferred language and signaling that it is okay to speak a different language at the event. You can offset reduced ticket prices that you often see associated with virtual events by being able to sell more tickets to your global audience. And you can increase the value for team members and attendees through better content comprehension by all. Now, while we talked about the benefits of interpretation, there are some unique benefits that happen to accrue when you start to add an AI into the interpretation mix. The first benefit that we often see is how easy it is to scale. Right now, we're using AI interpretation, and it was trivial to be able to support the group that we have of approximately 50 people on. Whether it's one person or 10,000, it's very easy to scale your AI interpretation. In addition, it is simple to add. You're able to add from 1 to a dozen languages, often already integrated directly with the platforms that you are using, especially with your virtual events. Like for instance, there's a direct integration with Zoom, with Wordly, as well as many other platforms such as Intrado, Meeting Play, Glisser, and so on. So AI interpretation makes it easy to just simply add dozens of languages, all with just a simple data entry. No more booths. No more setting up and coordinating the interpreters. Makes it very easy to do. And then, of course, affordability. With AI interpretation, you achieve a level of affordability that in often cases, you could add 100% of your content for what you often would spend for just providing interpretation into 1 or 2 languages for your keynotes. So those are some of the dramatic benefits that you can experience from AI interpretation. But while I tell you about these, what I really want to do is give the opportunity for someone who's had to live through these. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about, we're going to kind of shift gears here, and we're going to go into talking with Lisa about her experience using interpretation. So what I would like to do is invite Lisa to join the conversation now. And if you don't mind, I'm going to just ask you a few questions here, Lisa, so that you can introduce yourself and we can begin.
Sounds good.
So first, how long have you been a meeting professional, Lisa?
A very long time. I literally started working as an event coordinator when I first got out of college. And so it's been a very long, esteemed career. And I've been both on the corporate side of managing corporate events, as well as I've been on the agency side working for a very large global events agency before I branched out on my own in 2012.
So what inspired you to open your own business, LB Events?
Well, I work primarily in tech, being here in the Bay Area, and there are a lot of really great event marketing agencies in this area, but they do particularly cater to large accounts. And I really saw an opportunity to work with companies that were more on the medium size as opposed to the really big accounts who had very deep pockets. And these global event marketing agencies are very good, but there's a lot of overhead and a lot of expense associated with employing them to work on these big global conferences. And I really wanted to fill a niche that I saw with slightly smaller companies that really didn't have the deep pockets to afford to bring on a large event marketing agency.
Fascinating. So working with both the agencies and now with with the large corporate clients, the smaller corporate clients, how have you used human interpreters for your events in the past?
Well, in the past, we would hire an interpretation company that would bring in, depending on the size of our audience, we would have to bring in a number of interpreters, travel them to wherever the event was being held. And there was quite a bit of management requirement behind that exercise of getting those interpreters onboarded and integrated into the event.
Mm. So what were the pros and cons of using the human interpreters and getting them, as you said, integrated into the event?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I think definitely the pros are that you get a very professional, polished interpretation. Certainly, obviously, the accuracy is there. Um, it is, of course, all audio, no transcription, but I think from a user experience, it's a very positive experience working with interpreters who are native to that language.
Hmm. And what about the cons
The
of the human
cons,
interpreters?
quite honestly, the biggest con for me has always been cost. Particularly working with client budgets, as you mentioned earlier, that's a significant consideration. Because the industry of live interpreters is unionized, they can only speak for a certain period of time, a limited period of time. Understandably, it's a lot of heavy lifting. And so what we would have to do is travel multiple mini interpreters so that they could rotate their shifts and stay within the confines of their requirements, through their union. And then of course we had to travel them, we had to house them, provide their meals, and it just was extremely costly. And it just felt like it was just too much in many cases for what the client really had to spend.
Mm, okay.
It
So,
also takes up a lot of physical space
mm,
within the general session or in the breakouts themselves. So you have to account for, understandably some requirements that they have so as to not have the outside sound interruption. So I think it's also the infrastructure that you have to build out for them is definitely a strong consideration as well, because there is also cost associated with that.
fascinating. So, with all the costs and the headaches that you describe, but obviously the pros. So when did you first decide to transition and try and use AI interpretation as an alternative?
It's been about 3 years now. I mean, literally when it first started to come out into the market. Um, what I find myself really the opportunity that we have here, particularly in Silicon Valley, is that our clients are always challenging us to integrate new technologies and always be seeking um, new technologies that, while they may not be 100% proven yet, they definitely expect that you will integrate those technologies and try them to see how they go and really stay on the leading edge of what other meeting planners and companies are doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I find that to be actually a really great opportunity, because I am always looking for new technologies that I can make part of the user experience to enhance that experience for the attendees.
Fantastic. So once you transitioned into using AI interpretation, What were the most noticeable differences that you found?
Oh my gosh, there were so many. It was such a delightful experience. I think, first of all, it just was just to be able to, talk to the clients about the significant cost savings, which depending on the size of the conference, obviously I understand that that cost savings can vary, but oftentimes even with, let's just say, a 700 person conference versus, I don't know, 2,000, for live interpreters, you spend the same amount of money. So I found a couple of things to your point earlier, Kirk. We had a lot of Asian attendees, as an example, that were very technical, not the salespeople, but the technical people who did not speak English really at all. And so, of course, they were invited to our conference here in the US, but previously they could have never taken away the kind of content and understanding of what was being said. And so we were able to, through the application, through the Wordly application, as well as a headset, which 90% of them already had. They basically held Wordly in the palm of their hand, selected their language, and it just provided an entirely different experience for them, and primarily around the fact that there was great adoption. There were a lot of people that signed on to use Wordly in their native language, and yeah, it was just really nice to see the level of adoption we got.
Oh, that's fantastic. So obviously, as we evaluate different tools that we're using for our events, one of the things that we're looking at is the value of those different tools and options for the attendees. How did you determine the attendee value of providing AI interpretation?
So really the feedback, we obviously got verbal feedback on site, but really the truth came out in the very in-depth surveys that we did around the use of AI. And we got extremely positive experience from the attendees, where we even asked for specific examples about their experience. And the real takeaway for me was when everyone else asked to ensure that we included it in future conferences. And I thought that was a real testimonial to the technology as well as to Wordly.
Oh, well, thank you. That's fantastic. So as others, since as you mentioned, you're from Silicon Valley and therefore are often getting to pioneer some of these new technologies, what advice would you give to meeting planners who are considering using AI interpretation?
That's a good question. I think that if you look back at the poll that we took early in your session, Kirk, you really see that what people are looking for is to increase the value of the user experience. So I think that one of the surprises that I often see with using AI is that many of our users in, let's just say, the Nordic countries as an example, they speak very good English, but if given the opportunity to listen to the content in their native language, they actually chose that path. And we saw this with a very large sales kickoff event that I produced this past August. So I think that if you can, if the budget permits, which in comparison to live interpreters, there's really no comparison financially, but I think that it's so cost effective for the results that you get back and the increasing the attendee value and adoption of the content, being able to take that and understand that content and take something away from it, as opposed to just sort of really showing up.
Fascinating. Now, while it's not necessarily directly about AI interpretation, I know that, and we'll share a little bit more about. Sorry, not sure how that got muted. So we'll share a little bit more about your specific event coming up. But one of the things that I thought might be interesting to share as well is that you had been running this as an in-person sales kickoff event. And then obviously with COVID, you had to transition that fairly rapidly to an entirely virtual event. And I was wondering if you might have any advice for the other meeting professionals that have joined us today about your experience adapting a COVID impacted event to the new virtual world.
Yeah, it's a great question, Kirk. So I think we all can relate to this on some level, but we literally transitioned in March of last year into our virtual world of events, and I can probably speak for many of you that this was not our area of expertise previously, and I think it was a really hard pivot for everyone to start to figure it out very quickly, but that was the only option we were left with. And so I think that it's been interesting for me to socialize with my peers in the industry around the platforms that we're using, which ones work the best, what are the pros and cons of each of the platforms, but also just how can we make the events more engaging and retain the attendees that we're able to get. And look, the reality is that everyone is experiencing Zoom fatigue. So now I'm going to bring you yet another virtual event after we're basically working 8 hours a day via Zoom. So one of the things that I find particularly interesting to do is to try to integrate as much technology as I can into making the events more interactive and engaging the audience. And so I'm constantly looking for how we can do that. And the results have been actually very positive. I think I'll just pick on one technology. It's called Slido, Slido. And if you haven't used this for your virtual events yet, I strongly encourage you to take a look at it because you can do everything from polling to Q&A. You can make it fun. You can do games. You can do contests. You can do giveaways. And essentially you see the live engagement of the audience on the screen. And it's a very simple, even though it does have to be licensed, it's a very wonderful user experience. They basically scan a QR code on their screen, and then it takes them right into the interaction of Slido. So I'm just using Slido as one example, but look, everybody is disengaged a lot of the times. And I think especially now, after having attended these virtual conferences for almost a year, I think people are getting a little bit burnout. We're seeing that in the attendee numbers. We're seeing that in how long they stay in the conference, in the event, before they bail out. So just taking that data, we're really looking at ways that we can keep and retain those audiences at our events.
Oh, fantastic. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for your advice and your insights here.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Definitely, I'm sure that your peers are going to have some questions for you at the end. But at this point, we're going to transition a little bit. The first thing we're actually going to transition into is a case study related to actually the sales kickoff that you did. So this was with a company, Cohesity. And they did this was Lisa's event where they had this global sales kickoff that she had to take virtual this year. And it is officially an English language company. And of the 900 attendees, 288 of them were using Wordly for AI interpretation in 11 different languages. Now, I don't know, maybe if you could give us a quick feedback on what it's like to support 11 different languages, Lisa, with human interpreters versus AI. But maybe a little additional insight. Sorry to put you on the spot. I know you weren't expecting that, but I'd love your thoughts here.
Yeah, well, first of all, we would have never been able to offer interpretation in 11 languages. It would have just been cost prohibitive from my standpoint. So we would have had to pick and choose, the parts of the world where we had the most attendees coming from, and really pare it down to probably 1 or 2 languages to select from, just from a cost standpoint, especially for 900 attendees. Not that that is, a particularly small number, but I think as your conference gets bigger and you have deeper pockets and you're not doing an internal sales meeting, then perhaps you can afford to engage more interpreters in different languages. But the really beautiful part about Wordly is, of course, I think 11 languages is fantastic, which I was very surprised by. But, there were way more than that even available had people chosen to select those languages.
Right. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Lisa. So the Cohesity case study, if you'd like to learn more, it's available on the Wordly website in much more detail. As you can see, there's a link to it available, and when you download the material afterwards, that link will be available. Now, in addition to the Cohesity case study, we wanted to highlight another case study, and that was one where we conducted an event with the European Association for Cardiothoracic Surgeons. And one of the key takeaways is that, this is a group that is literally training surgeons about surgical techniques. I mean, this was part of their professional development hours, that they were going through this content to be able to understand what were the latest advances. And so, this was definitely pushing the systems to the limit to deal with the technical terminology that is associated with, cardiothoracic surgery. That's the surgery of hearts, lungs, and effectively all the internal organs within the chest cavity. And they were able to do this successfully with the event. Once again, the case study is available online, and you'll be able to download it. They covered multiple time zones, so they did something that they were unable to do before in the physical world, which was really have the material available and be delivered in the specific time zones for their different attendees. And then more importantly is that they were actually able to increase their attendance from 4,000 participants to 6,000 participants, partly through actively advertising the language availability, so that it was no longer a just purely available in English conference. So that's a little bit about some of the success stories we're using Wordly. But right now what we want to do is, Jerica, if you'd please open the poll number 3. This is one of my favorite questions to ask when we think about interpretation. Please answer, how often do you discuss interpretation options with clients? Always, half the time, occasionally, or never? This is a look in the rearview mirror. What you choose to do going forward may be very different. At the very least, you're gauging how much room there is to grow at using some of the new tools and tips that you've invested in learning about today. Okay, Jerica, let's see. Why don't we go ahead and please give a couple more seconds. There you go. Perfect. Finalize the result. Well, it looks like, this is as expected. That's very interesting that we have 13% that always discuss interpretation with their clients, at 53% occasionally, and 34% never. Let's, one of the things that we want to do in this presentation is give you the opportunity to not only learn a little bit about what AI interpretation is, but give you some tools that will make it so you're better prepared the next time you talk with the client to discuss the potential for interpretation. So with that in mind, what we're going to do is we're going to switch to the topic of how to talk to clients about interpretation. So to try to make it somewhat a formula for you to potentially use, we've created this little spread, this little flow chart that allows you to understand, how you might want to consider whether you should be talking to your client about interpretation or not. One of the questions that you might be asking is, if you're charging attendees, and then can your topic and marketing draw globally? So if you are charging attendees and you can draw globally, then you probably you probably need translation, because that will be able to draw a larger global audience of paid attendees. Now, even if you're not charging attendees, maybe you're targeting a multilingual audience, or a global audience, like for instance, a sales kickoff like Lisa did, which definitely has a multilingual audience for the sales teams from around the world. And perhaps that is a good reason why you could use translation. Do you have accessibility requirements related to translation, as you see with the scrolling English on the side of the screen here? Things like Wordly are available for accessibility. And so while it's not exactly translation, it's more transcription, that might be a need that you have depending on accessibility. And then finally, if you are a global brand or conference, being able to connect with people regardless of whether you think you're targeting a specific audience or not, definitely reinforces your global brand. And so with being a global brand or conference, being able to add translation might be something that you need. Now, if you are adding translation and interpretation services, one of the things that we suggest is that when you're talking with your clients about this, is that you really set realistic expectations. There is generally, as Lisa pointed out, a very good return on investment, but the return on investment does depend on many factors, including how well you have educated and attracted the attendees that are going to need this. The suggestions that we have are that you begin promoting the translation features when you launch the website for your meeting, that you include the mention that you have interpretation services available in the pre-meeting outreach campaigns, and that if you are doing something on site or in the virtual world at the time, you have push notifications via your meeting apps and that are notifying people and letting them know about the opportunities for accessing simultaneous interpretation. The other thing that set realistic expectations is that there is no perfect translator. And so one of the things is that often there's an expectation of perfection. But while there's no perfect translator, just because they're not perfect doesn't mean that there isn't tremendous value in having a mostly, a fairly accurate translator. And so helping understand this, helping set that expectation of that there is no perfection, it requires some behavior modification for the attendees who've never used AI translation before. Like, for example, if you've only listened before, you might not be that excited about using a text-based system. Now, it just so happens that Wordly does offer an audio option as well, so you can listen along as well as read along. But that's definitely a new experience for many. And they definitely want to provide clear and easy instructions. It was one thing to wear a headset. It's a different thing to be able to resize a browser window or to watch it on your phone by going to a specific link. So setting expectations accordingly is very important. Now, in addition to setting those expectations, you definitely want to talk with your clients about the measures of success in advance. Are your measures of success things such as, well, have we increased registration, and have we maybe particularly increased registration from outside of the host country? Is that one of the key measures that you're looking for success? In which case, see the desire for doing the pre-marketing as a way to help assist that. The number of attendees, looking at, is one of your measures of success how many attendees actually access the translation services. As Lisa measured in her event, she had 288 individuals using Wordly in 11 different languages. What is your measure of success there? The number of languages accessed, how many people were accessing it, etc. Also, of course, the attendee survey, asking for that feedback as Lisa did in her event to be able to get the feedback on how they experienced it. And finally, how does this, while some things are hard to measure, understanding did this improve inclusiveness and provide a much more engaging experience for the attendees? Definitely something to try to get out in your survey, but maybe that is one of the key measures of success. All of these things are important when you're working with your client with interpretation to help them understand, did we actually achieve our results by adding AI interpretation to our event? And then finally, we suggest in these conversations that you be honest about the pros and cons of interpretation, especially AI interpretation. The pros with AI interpretation are that it's novel. It's something that most people have not used before in an event. It's very inclusive because, as you can see, you can add any of 19 languages, so it's not limited to just a few languages. There's tremendous value add in being able to have both written and audio options available for translation. And this can broaden the appeal of your event. In addition, the pros are there's just simply many more languages available through AI interpretation, and frankly, at a greater, as Lisa pointed out, great cost savings over the traditional approaches. Now, the cons that we definitely suggest is that, it does require new behaviors to get value. People are going to have to, in the case possibly read, in the case of the virtual event, resize their browser windows. Those are things that they are going to have to do, which do require some changes in and how the attendee behaves. Obviously, it's not free. There's still a cost, even though it is more affordable. It doesn't mean it's something that you get for free. And then finally, it's not magic. As we pointed out, no translator is perfect. No translation is perfect. If you have a bad audio connection, there's nothing that AI interpretation can do to fix that, to make the translation any better. And so there's things that we just want to always say, that while it's pretty amazing, it's not magical. And so that's one of the things we like to point out when we talk to potential users of the AI interpretation in the Wordly system. So a quick summary, helping clients decide about translation, work with them to set realistic expectations, discuss measures of success in advance, and be honest about the pros and cons.